In this lesson, we'll discuss the importance of using gamma correction for our renders. Okay, so as we saw at the end of our previous lesson, we have this main sunlight that's been set up, although our scene is really dark at this point. So let's take our first step toward adding a new lighting system into this. So let's start by just grabbing our daylight, and over here in the modifiers, let's make a few quick adjustments. So I'm going to switch the sunlight to a mental ray sun, and I'll set the skylight to a mental ray sky. It's going to ask us if we want to go ahead and add a physical sky environment. Let's go ahead and click yes. All right, and now let's see what we get. So once again, Shift Q to render this out. Okay, so a little bit better. You can now actually start to see where we have just a very slight amount of illumination that's coming through here. A little bit of light bouncing, although you can still see this scene is extremely dark. Now, granted, a part of that is the fact that we do only have just one light in here, and we do have a lot of light setup still to go. But more importantly, there is actually a problem with this render, and this is really a problem with the way that Max is showing us this render. So, within 3ds Max, this image that we see, or this render that we see, is actually not formatted to be properly displayed on our monitors, which is part of the reason that it shows up really dark like this. So to ensure that this image gets displayed properly on our monitors, we have to use a process called gamma correction, and this is extremely important. Otherwise, if we don't use gamma correction, then it's going to be much more difficult to start to get realistic lighting, because the image itself is actually not being displayed properly, which again is where a lot of these lighting problems will start to arise from. So to enable this gamma correction, let's go up to the rendering menu, and all the way down toward the bottom we have gamma LUT setup. So let's turn this on, and let's first start by enabling gamma correction. And now that will make sure that our rendered image gets properly displayed to a gamma of 2.2, which is what we want for our computer monitors. Now, again, we also want to come in here and make sure that our materials and colors, we want to turn those on, because what we're going to find is once we enable this gamma correction, the colors that we're going to see on our screen as far as materials, textures, are going to look really washed out. And as we start to choose new colors for these, the colors that we choose with our color chips and color sliders are not going to match at all what we get in the viewport. So by turning these two options on, we can, again, kind of match these back up. So what we choose for our color swatches and color chips and even our textures will now match this new gamma-corrected process that we've introduced. Now, as far as working with bitmap files, input gamma, we're going to set that to 2.2 because most of the JPEGs, bitmaps, images that we're going to plug in already have gamma correction applied to them. So to make sure that they don't wind up overly bright and overly washed out, we're going to make sure that we tell Max that these already have gamma correction. So this is going to fix that for us. Now the output gamma, this one's really up to you. If you are going to be rendering your image out as some kind of a high dynamic range format, so if you like to render out as an HDR or an EXR image, you're going to want to leave this set to a value of 1. Now, if you like to render your images out as a bitmap or a JPEG or some kind of an 8-bit format, then you would want to set this to 2.2. In my case, I'm going to leave this set to 1 because I do like to render out as a HDR or a EXR, some kind of a high dynamic range format. So with these options set up, gamma enabled, these two options enabled, 2.2 for the input and 1.0 for the output, click OK. Now, again, everything may start to look a little bit weird on your monitor. Things may look a little bit bright. That's completely normal. Now, if we were to come in and re-render this again, this actually starts to look a little bit better. Now, obviously, there's still a long ways to go before we could actually call this finished, but immediately you could start to see that our light distribution is now a lot better. And again, it's not because we've changed anything with the lighting, it's just that now we have set this image to be properly displayed on our monitors. And now, by doing this early on in our lighting stage, before we start to really get caught up with the lights, by doing this early on, it's going to make our entire lighting workflow from this point on go so much smoother. So always make it a point to introduce your gamma correction workflow as early as possible in your lighting. So now that we have our gamma correction set up, what we can start to do in our next lesson is now proceed with a little bit more confidence and a lot more ease with setting up some of the additional lighting that we need for the scene.